James had always considered himself fortunate. After decades of long hours in a demanding career, he had finally retired to the peaceful life he had imagined since his youth. His cozy home overlooked a sparkling lake, and his favorite routine was carrying a steaming mug of coffee to the wooden dock each morning. There he sat quietly as the sun painted the sky, listening to the soft lap of water against the shore. Tied securely to that dock was Serenity, his boat, his pride, and his sanctuary. It wasn't a shiny, brand-new vessel, but James had restored it with his own hands. Years of weekends were spent sanding the wood, polishing the fittings, and carefully repainting the faded hull until the boat looked almost as if it had been reborn. To James, Serenity wasn't just a hobby. It was a companion, a reminder of patience, craftsmanship, and the freedom he had worked so hard to earn. Neighbors often waved when they saw him guiding the boat gently across the lake. Children from next door had climbed aboard for evening rides, and visiting friends admired the peaceful way James navigated through the quiet water. For him, it was never about showing off. It was about the calm, the escape, and the connection with the place he now called home. That sense of peace was shaken one ordinary afternoon. Among the bills and advertisements in his mailbox was a letter from the neighborhood association. At first, James didn't think much of it. He had always followed the rules carefully, mowing his lawn on time, paying fees promptly, and keeping his property in order. But as his eyes scanned the page, a tight knot formed in his stomach. The association had decided that his boat was a problem. They claimed it was too large, inappropriately docked, and even disruptive to the appearance of the community. They wanted it removed within 2 weeks, or there would be consequences. James sat down heavily on his porch chair, the paper trembling in his hand. He looked out across the water where Serenity floated, rocking gently as if unaware of the accusations against her. Unsightly? Inappropriate? The words echoed in his mind. How could anyone look at that boat, polished, well-kept, and carefully maintained, and call it a nuisance? Frustration slowly turned into disbelief. Around the lake, he had seen everything from weather-beaten kayaks to inflatable rafts left half deflated on people's docks. None of those had ever been mentioned in meetings or letters. Why single him out? Why his boat? Over the next few days, James noticed the shift in the neighborhood atmosphere. Neighbors who once greeted him with easy smiles now seemed hesitant, offering quick nods before hurrying away. He caught whispers drifting across yards, conversations that stopped abruptly when he passed. Some clearly thought the association was right. Others looked guilty, as if they wished they could say something, but didn't dare. And then there was Carol. She was the head of the board, known for her stern expression and reputation for keeping order. Some residents admired her strictness, while others avoided her altogether. James had never had much reason to interact with her, but now it was clear. She was the driving force behind this complaint. That evening, as the sky darkened and the lake reflected the fading colors of sunset, James sat silently on the dock. He watched Serenity sway with the rhythm of the water and felt a storm of emotions inside him. This wasn't just about a boat. It was about his peace, his freedom, and the very life he had worked so hard to build. Folding the letter carefully, James slid it into a folder inside his desk. He wasn't about to give up. He had followed every rule, respected every guideline, and lived quietly without trouble. If the association wanted a fight, they were going to learn something they had overlooked. Because hidden within his property papers was a truth that would change everything. A truth the HOA had no idea existed. And as James leaned back in his chair, gazing at the lake with calm determination, he whispered under his breath, "They don't know who they're dealing with." The days following that unsettling letter felt heavier than usual. James noticed how quickly peace could be replaced by tension when an authority, however small, decided to press its weight on someone. Each time he walked outside, he half expected to see another notice waiting in the mailbox. And sure enough, only a few mornings later, another envelope appeared. The new letter was even harsher. It reminded him that the association had already ordered the removal of his boat and warned that failure to comply would result in daily fines. It went further this time, stating that if the matter continued unresolved, legal action could follow. The language was sharp, almost threatening, as if the boat tied to his dock was a crime against the neighborhood. James felt his chest tighten with anger. He wasn't a man who enjoyed conflict, but he couldn't help thinking the entire situation was absurd. The same lake where families laughed during summer picnics, where children splashed and neighbors fished together, was suddenly being treated like some fragile stage set that his boat was ruining. One afternoon, as James was raking leaves in his yard, Carol herself walked up the driveway, clipboard in hand. She carried herself with the air of someone who believed she had complete control over the neighborhood. Her expression was polite, but the firmness in her voice left no room for kindness. "James," she began, gesturing toward the dock, "that boat doesn't belong here. It's against our guidelines. You'll need to have it removed before fines begin." James leaned on his rake and studied her. "Can you show me the exact rule that says my boat is a violation?" he asked calmly. Carol flipped through the pages on her clipboard, hesitating slightly. "It falls under maintaining the harmony of the community. We can't have every homeowner keeping whatever they want out on the water. The board has decided this is disruptive." Her answer didn't surprise him. It wasn't about rules, it was about power. Carol was used to people nodding their heads and quietly obeying. James wasn't ready to do that. "I've followed every written guideline since moving here," he replied evenly. "If you're going to accuse me, I'd like to see something more specific than harmony." Her lips tightened, but she didn't argue further. She simply reminded him of the deadline and turned away, walking briskly back down the street. That evening, James sat inside, reviewing the letters again. A sense of injustice burned inside him. He had chosen this community for its peace and beauty, never imagining that an association could try to dictate something so personal as whether he could keep his boat. Yet as the weight of frustration pressed down, a spark of memory surfaced. He remembered the day he had purchased the property years ago. It hadn't been a simple transaction. The seller had mentioned something unusual, ownership that extended beyond the yard and into the water itself. Curious, James dug through the drawer where he kept old files. There it was, a folder containing property deeds and maps. He laid them across the table, tracing the boundaries with his finger. And there it was in black and white. His land included full rights to the lake. It wasn't community property, nor did the HOA have authority over it. The water, the dock, and every boat floating upon it were within his ownership. James sat back, the corners of his mouth lifting into a faint smile. The irony was almost too much to believe. The very people threatening to fine him for misusing the lake had been using it themselves for years, kayaking, fishing, even hosting neighborhood events, without realizing they were doing so on his property. For the first time since the letters arrived, James felt a surge of confidence. The association thought they held the power, but in truth, their authority ended the moment it touched the water. He had remained quiet all these years, never needing to mention his ownership. But now, perhaps, it was time to remind them. He folded the documents neatly and placed them back into the folder. This wasn't just about saving his boat anymore. It was about standing up against unfairness, about showing that rules couldn't be bent to crush someone's peace. Looking out at Serenity, glimmering softly under the moonlight, James whispered, "They think they can push me. Let's see what they do when they find out the truth." The following week, James decided it was time to stop waiting and start acting. The HOA had made it clear they weren't going to back down, and if he kept silent, the situation would only grow worse. He had lived a life where patience and silence were often the best tools, but this wasn't one of those times. The third letter arrived on a gray morning. It was colder in tone than the ones before, warning of immediate fines and the possibility of towing Serenity away. The words were sharp, almost triumphant, as if the board believed they had already won. James carefully folded the letter and placed it on the stack with the others. They had no idea that every notice they sent only strengthened his position. That evening, he attended the HOA meeting. The gatherings were usually routine, discussions about lawn maintenance, parking spaces, or the community pool, but tonight the air buzzed with quiet tension. Residents filled the small community center, some curious, others restless. Whispers followed James as he walked to the back of the room, folder in hand. Carol, seated at the front with the other board members, cleared her throat and began the meeting. After rushing through minor updates, she arrived at what she clearly considered the most pressing issue. "There is a continuing violation on the lake," she announced, her eyes sweeping toward James. "A large boat that disrupts the appearance and order of our community. Despite repeated warnings, the owner has refused to comply. The board will now begin daily fines until the matter is resolved." Murmurs spread across the room. Some nodded in agreement while others looked uneasy. James stood slowly, his calm presence drawing attention. "I'd like to respond," he said, his voice steady but firm. Carol leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "You may speak, but the rules are very clear." James walked to the front, placing his folder on the table. He looked around the room, making eye contact with neighbors he had shared meals and stories with. "I've received your letters. I've heard the accusations. But what hasn't been acknowledged is the truth about this lake." He opened the folder, sliding out maps and documents that had yellowed slightly with age. "When I bought my property years ago, I purchased more than a house and a yard. This deed," he said, holding up a certified document, "includes ownership of the lake itself. Every inch of it." The room fell silent. Some gasped. Others leaned forward in disbelief. Carol's confident expression faltered. James continued, his tone calm but resolute. "For years, I've welcomed everyone's use of the water. I've never restricted fishing, kayaking, or community gatherings. I never felt the need to boast about ownership, but to stand here today, accused of violating rules that don't even apply, while the board threatens fines for keeping my boat on my lake, that crosses a line." He spread the maps across the table, showing clear boundary lines and signatures. "This isn't hearsay. It's legal. The lake is private property, and it belongs to me. The HOA has no authority here. Not over the water. Not over my boat." The room erupted into whispers. Board members exchanged uneasy glances. Neighbors looked at one another, some with wide eyes, others with relieved smiles. Carol stood, her face flushed. "That can't be right. The lake is part of the community." James interrupted gently, his voice still even. "It feels that way because I've allowed it, and I will continue to allow it as long as it's respected. But if you want to fine me for using my own lake, then we need to reconsider everything. Every picnic, every swim, every boat ride the association has ever organized here, it all took place because I permitted it. You've been acting as if you control the lake, but you never have." The silence that followed was heavy. No one dared to break it at first. Finally, a neighbor in the back spoke up. "He's right. I remember when he bought the property. It included the water rights. We all thought it was generous that he never restricted us." Carol's voice cracked slightly as she tried to recover. "We'll need to verify these claims." James nodded. "Please do. I'll be waiting. But until then, I won't be moving my boat, and I'd advise against trying to tow it. You'd be trespassing." With that, he calmly collected his papers and returned to his seat. The meeting, once so full of authority, now felt fragile, uncertain. James knew the real battle had just begun, but for the first time in weeks, he felt the ground firmly under his feet. Serenity wasn't just a boat anymore. It was a symbol of standing tall when others tried to push him down. And tonight, everyone in that room had seen it. The week after the meeting felt different. For the first time since the letters had begun arriving, James could walk outside without the same weight pressing on his chest. Word of his revelation had spread like wildfire. Neighbors who once avoided his gaze now approached him with curiosity, admiration, even gratitude. Some admitted they had quietly resented the HOA's strictness for years, but never had the courage to challenge it. "You've done what a lot of us wanted to do," one neighbor told him while walking her dog. "They've pushed people around for too long." James nodded politely, though he knew the fight wasn't finished. Carol wouldn't give up so easily. Her power in the neighborhood came from her authority over rules, and if that slipped away, so would the control she had built over the years. Sure enough, just a few days later, another letter appeared in his mailbox. This time it was worded differently, less certain, more defensive. The board insisted they were reviewing property claims and warned him not to misrepresent ownership. James chuckled softly as he read it. He didn't need to misrepresent anything. The documents spoke for themselves. At the next HOA meeting, Carol tried to regain ground. She insisted the board would be seeking legal review and accused James of creating division within the community. Her voice wavered, though, and the usual firmness wasn't there. James raised his hand calmly. "Division didn't start with me," he said. "It started when the board chose to threaten a homeowner without reason. I've respected every guideline, yet I was targeted unfairly. And now that the truth about the lake is known, you're scrambling to hold on to control that was never yours." A few people clapped quietly, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Carol's face flushed as she realized support was slipping away. James waited a moment, then pulled out a document he had drafted with the help of a lawyer. "I don't want conflict. I don't want to stop families from enjoying the lake. But if this continues, I'll have no choice but to limit access to my property. That's not what I want. So here's my proposal. The HOA formally recognizes my ownership of the lake and withdraws all complaints about my boat. In return, I'll grant full access to all residents, free of charge so long as it's respected. No more threats, no more fines, just peace." The board members shifted uneasily. Carol protested immediately. "We can't agree to terms dictated by a single homeowner." But a man from the audience spoke up, his voice firm. "He owns the lake, Carol. We all know it now. If you keep pushing, we'll lose access altogether. Do you want that on your shoulders?" Others began nodding, speaking in hushed tones, agreeing that James's offer was more than fair. Some even argued that he was being generous. After all, he had every right to restrict the lake entirely, but instead he was offering open access. The pressure built, and for the first time, Carol looked cornered. She tried to rally the other board members, but they avoided her eyes. The shift was undeniable. The community was no longer on her side. That night, as James walked home, neighbors stopped him along the way. One thanked him for his courage. Another admitted they'd been fined once for a minor lawn violation and wished they'd spoken up back then. James realized he had become something he never expected, a quiet voice of resistance against unnecessary control. Still, he knew Carol wouldn't surrender easily. She had built her reputation on being unyielding, and losing this battle meant more than just a boat. It meant losing authority. He expected more resistance, perhaps even a legal challenge. But James wasn't worried. He had the law, the documents, and now, the support of many neighbors on his side. Standing at the end of his dock later that evening, he looked at Serenity gleaming under the lantern light. The boat had once been a personal treasure. But now it had become something larger, a symbol of standing firm when pushed unfairly. The water was calm, but James knew another wave was coming. And when it did, he was ready. The following weeks were some of the most unusual the neighborhood had ever seen. For years, HOA meetings had been predictable affairs, led firmly by Carol and accepted quietly by residents. But now everything felt unsettled. People spoke more freely. Neighbors debated rules instead of nodding along, and whispers about James's stand traveled from one porch to another. Carol tried to keep her grip strong. She sent out carefully worded letters, insisting the board was considering legal avenues and reviewing ownership claims. But the tone of her authority had changed. Where once her words carried certainty, now they carried doubt. Many residents began openly questioning her leadership. Some even approached James privately to apologize for not speaking up sooner. One Saturday afternoon, as James was polishing Serenity, a family strolled by with fishing poles. The father waved awkwardly. "James, I just want to thank you. We were worried we'd lose access to the lake altogether. What you're doing, it means a lot." James smiled faintly. The lake has always been for everyone to enjoy. That hasn't changed. I just won't let anyone take away what's mine without reason. Behind his calm words was a steady determination. He wasn't fighting for attention or recognition. He was fighting for peace and for the right to live quietly without unnecessary interference. At the next HOA meeting, the turning point finally arrived. The room was packed with more residents than usual attending, clearly curious about how the board would handle the standoff. Carol opened the meeting with her usual formality, but her voice lacked its familiar firmness. The following weeks were some of the most unusual the neighborhood had ever seen. For years, HOA meetings had been predictable affairs, led firmly by Carol and accepted quietly by residents. But now, everything felt unsettled. People spoke more freely. Neighbors debated rules instead of nodding along, and whispers about James's stand traveled from one porch to another. Carol tried to keep her grip strong. She sent out carefully worded letters insisting the board was considering legal avenues and reviewing ownership claims. But the tone of her authority had changed. Where once her words carried certainty, now they carried doubt. Many residents began openly questioning her leadership. Some even approached James privately to apologize for not speaking up sooner. One Saturday afternoon, as James was polishing Serenity, a family strolled by with fishing poles. The father waved awkwardly. "James, I just want to thank you. We were worried we'd lose access to the lake altogether. What you're doing, it means a lot." James smiled faintly. "The lake has always been for everyone to enjoy. That hasn't changed. I just won't let anyone take away what's mine without reason." Behind his calm words was a steady determination. He wasn't fighting for attention or recognition. He was fighting for peace and for the right to live quietly without unnecessary interference. At the next HOA meeting, the turning point finally arrived. The room was packed with more residents than usual attending, clearly curious about how the board would handle the standoff. Carol opened the meeting with her usual formality, but her voice lacked its familiar firmness. "Regarding the matter of the boat and the lake," she began, "the board has reviewed documents provided by Mr. James. While there are still questions to be addressed, it has become clear that the association does not hold authority over the lake itself." A ripple of murmurs ran through the room. James sat quietly, hands folded, waiting. Carol continued reluctantly. "Therefore, the board will be withdrawing all complaints related to the vessel known as Serenity. We will also be drafting an acknowledgement of the lake's private ownership while ensuring residents can continue to enjoy access." The room erupted in a mix of relief and applause. Neighbors looked toward James, some smiling, others nodding in respect. For many of them, it was the first time they had seen the HOA step back from a fight. James rose to speak, his voice steady. "Thank you. That's all I ever wanted. To be treated fairly. I've never intended to stop anyone from using the lake, and I won't start now. But this has been a reminder that rules should protect harmony, not destroy it." He didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stated the truth, and in that moment, his quiet dignity carried more weight than Carol's years of authority ever had. After the meeting, neighbors gathered around him, thanking him, shaking his hand. Some even laughed softly, joking that they wished he'd run for the board himself. James smiled politely but declined. He hadn't taken this stand to gain power. He had done it to protect peace. Carol left quickly that evening, her head down, the clipboard she always carried pressed tightly against her side. Within weeks, she resigned from her position, citing personal reasons. Few were surprised. Without her leadership, the board softened, becoming less aggressive, more cooperative. For James, life slowly returned to what it had been before the letters. Mornings on the dock with coffee, afternoons polishing Serenity, evenings where the lake glowed under the setting sun. The difference now was a deeper sense of gratitude, not just for the lake, but for the strength he had found in himself when pushed to the edge. One quiet evening, James sat on the dock with his grandchildren. The children dangled their feet into the water, giggling at the ripples. Behind them, Serenity bobbed gently, the lantern on its bow glowing warmly in the dusk. "Grandpa," one of them asked, "will your boat always stay here?" James looked at the vessel, then at the wide stretch of water beyond. He smiled softly. "As long as I live here, it will. This is its home, and ours." The children nodded happily, returning to their play. James leaned back in his chair, breathing deeply as peace settled over him once more. The HOA had tried to strip him of that peace, but in the end they had failed. The boat was still there, the lake still his, and the life he had chosen still intact. And for James, that was victory enough.